10 minutes later, the monitoring system in the office began to flash and sound an intermittent alarm. It wasn't an unusual occurrence. The desert environment was tough, and the electricity supply was often unreliable, so no one paid any attention to the alarm, and no one noticed Kyle arrive at the entrance to the top security laboratory. In fact, if anyone had seen him, they wouldn't have recognized him, as he was in disguise. He had taped the magnetic card against the reader, hit the confirmation button, and the door clicked open. He cautiously grasped the handle and opened it up. He had remembered to wear gloves so that he wouldn't leave any fingerprints. It would have been a lie to say that he wasn't nervous. He had never broken into a high-security research laboratory before, and he had no idea what he might find inside, or if he might be caught. He didn't know if there were any other identification systems inside either, so when the door opened, he quickly checked, saw that there weren't, and dashed in. It was dark inside, but as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, Kyle could tell that the top-level laboratory was considerably bigger than the others. He could make out an operating table on the far side with an LED display that was emitting the only light in the room. He crept into the lab, and when he was confident that he was alone, he turned on the light. He was horrified to find, lying motionless on the operating table, a person covered in metal patches with wires protruding from them. Attached to the body by a tube was a container of liquid, and beside that was the LED screen. Kyle cautiously approached the person on the table and glanced at his face. He gasped with shock when he saw that the person resembled Callum. He could see no movement in the chest of the man who seemed to be Callum, so he couldn't tell if he was dead or alive. On a second table nearby, there were containers of various shapes and sizes, each one containing some kind of liquid or powder. Some were labeled, while others weren't, but Kyle imagined that they were all biological agents aimed at targeting the central nervous system. He felt a chill ripple through his body. If the person in front of him was indeed Callum, he might be able to get him out of there, but there was no guarantee that he was even alive. He took a closer look at the man, but there was something odd about the face. Over the years, Callum had come in contact with several human transformation situations, and as he examined the body, he noticed a slight crease on the man's neck. Is that a mask of human skin? If it is, that would explain the oddness of his face, and it would mean that it is most likely Callum. It also explains why the smart private eye didn't recognize him, and why we haven't been able to track him down. Kyle glanced at the metal plates attached to Callum's body and wondered what they were for. He thought he might be able to work out how to operate them, but the more he examined them, the more he realized he had no idea what to do with them. He pulled out his phone and took a few photos of everything of interest, and then he slipped out of the laboratory, removing his disguise as he went. He was desperate to tell Rebecca what he had discovered, but he had to wait until noon, when they were able to take a walk together. He explained everything to her, and she listened attentively. By the time he had finished, she could barely contain her emotions. I want to confront them about this, but I might cause my brother's death if I do that. I have to see him for myself and make sure he's still alive. And if he is, see if there's anything I can do to help him. Can you get me into the laboratory? Sure, we'll go tonight. In the meeting earlier, quite a few of them were yawning, so I think they've been working late in the lab at night. They'll probably do the same again tonight, so we'll have to be careful. Rebecca nodded. Okay, tonight it is. Later that evening, after they had eaten dinner, Rebecca and Kyle armed themselves with weapons and headed toward the laboratory building. As soon as they arrived, Rebecca saw a dark shadow approaching them. Kyle saw it too, and he reacted quickly. In a flash, he pushed the person to the ground. It's me. The voice came from the shadow, and they recognized it instantly. It was Reggie. What on earth are you doing here? Rebecca asked him incredulously. I mean, why are you here at all? Same as you. Kyle shot Rebecca a knowing glance, and then he turned to Reggie. You found it too? I was at the window of my room one night when I saw someone leaving the accommodation building, so I followed them. I assume you're here for Callum? Rebecca had to give him credit for jumping to that conclusion. Yes, we are. Kyle didn't want Reggie getting in his way. It might get dangerous later on. I don't think you should get involved, Reggie. I have a gun and a car. I can pick you up. You have a car out here in the desert? Rebecca was puzzled. It's a desert off-roader. I asked Dad to send it over earlier. Kyle reconsidered their options. A car would certainly help. Okay, you can come, but take this. He handed Reggie a walkie-talkie. We're going to the lab now. If we run into any trouble, meet us outside. Reggie took the walkie-talkie. Sure. Rebecca began to walk away, and Reggie called after her. Rebecca, be careful. Before she could respond, Kyle put his arm around her and placed himself between her and Reggie so that the boy could no longer see her. Then, he led her upstairs, leaving Reggie alone and staring after them. Kyle and Rebecca padded silently along the corridor to the door of the high-security lab and listened outside. There were no sounds coming from inside. They hid in the shadows, preparing to make their move. But just then, someone appeared in the corridor, walking in their direction. It was Ken. He used his ID card to open the door, and in that instance, Rebecca and Kyle both saw the light coming from inside, indicating that someone was there. In the blink of an eye, Kyle summoned all his strength and hit Ken on the back of the head with the butt of his gun. Ken fell to the floor, unconscious. Kyle lifted him by his feet and dragged him into the lavatory. Rebecca followed him in and closed the door. The bright light made Rebecca feel momentarily dizzy. Then, she heard the sound of something heavy landing on the ground behind her. She spun around and discovered Kyle engaged in hand-to-hand combat with Roberto. She hadn't expected Roberto to be so skillful, and she watched in astonishment. His whole body moved with agility, and he had a sinister look on his face. The two men fought for several minutes until Kyle got the upper hand. He twisted Roberto's arms behind his back and pressed him to the ground with his knee. There was a moment of silence, and Rebecca walked toward the operating table, where her brother still lay. Look out! Kyle cried out to her. She instinctively dodged to one side, and the syringe in Ken's hand brushed past her, narrowly missing her neck. She gasped, and, thinking quickly, she pushed Ken over, forcing him to hit his head on the edge of the table and knocking the syringe out of his hand. Kyle, who still had Roberto pinned to the floor, grabbed the syringe and stabbed it into Roberto's neck. The man twitched a few times, and then he fell still. Kyle took out a rope from his bag and tied Roberto and Ken up together. Rebecca watched as Roberto's face turned blue and his lips turned purple. She glanced fearfully at Kyle, afraid that they had killed him. But she didn't have any time to worry about her colleagues. She needed to check on her brother, if, indeed, he was her brother. She stared down at the face of the unconscious man and instantly recognized him as the man who had been introduced to her as Chester when they had been in Ecuador. Kyle had warned Rebecca about the mask of human skin. She reached out tentatively and touched the crease, where it joined her brother's own skin. Wait, don't peel it off. They used some special method to attach it to his original face. If you remove it, it might tear his skin off. Rebecca hadn't thought of that, and she withdrew her hand with a gasp. Forcing herself to remain calm, she took Callum's pulse instead. It was frighteningly erratic, beating rapidly for a few seconds and then slowing almost to a stop. It was obvious that there was some kind of poison in his body, and Rebecca was convinced it was a synthetic biological agent. She felt utterly helpless, and she shook her head. Kyle, who had been watching from a distance, felt a surge of anger and gave Ken a sharp kick. What's happened to him? Ken jolted to his senses, but he simply sneered at Kyle and said nothing. Kyle slowly and deliberately took out a knife with long, sharp barbs on it. Maybe this will help you talk. Rebecca had never seen Kyle use such threatening force before. His eyes were filled with venom, and his entire demeanor had changed, but it didn't scare her. Still, Ken didn't speak. He just stared malevolently at Kyle. Kyle raised the knife and was poised to stab it into Ken's leg when Roberto woke up. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" His voice echoed thunderously around the room, causing Rebecca to shudder. "You think you found out what's going on around here, but you don't know the half of it. All you've succeeded in doing is alerting your enemy, you idiots." He let out a sinister laugh. The blood drained from Rebecca's face, and she began to panic, but Kyle remained calm. "Do you want to tell me about the person outside? If I'm not mistaken, he's waiting for your signal about right now. What will he do when he doesn't receive it? What action will he take?" Roberto snarled at him, and his eyes filled with malice. "Who are you?" "I'm the one asking the questions. What has been done to the man on that operating table?" "I don't know any more than you do. We're just contractors to take on private jobs." Suddenly, Roberto winced in pain. "That serum you injected into me is starting to kick in. I need the antidote. Give it to me." "Where will I find the antidote?" Kyle was in no hurry to administer it. "In that cabinet there." Roberto pointed anxiously at a cabinet across the room. "It's the one marked N4U8. Rebecca hurried over to the cabinet and found the bottle of the antidote and a fresh syringe. "Who's paying you to do this?" she asked as she took the antidote to Kyle. "I don't know. We're just here for the money. We're given our mission and nothing else." Roberto was writhing in pain, and he struggled to get his words out. "I lost a bet, and Ken's family owes a lot of money. We were just told to make sure that the man's personality and memories were erased." He pointed to Callum on the table. Rebecca felt a chill in her heart, and she understood what Roberto was saying. Callum had been turned into a different person with a new personality and a new face. Is he even my brother anymore? The treatment that Callum had received had placed all his old memories and personality traits into a sealed compartment in his brain. Then, he had been given artificial information that had turned him into a completely different person. He had essentially been split into two separate personalities. What condition is he in right now? If we take him away from this place, will he die? Rebecca couldn't bear to think of losing her brother for good, and the emotion sounded in her voice. Roberto grinned viciously again. "Why do you care about other men in front of your boyfriend? Aren't you afraid that you'll make him jealous?" Kyle's eyes turned cold. "I've got a good mind to let you die from that poison in your veins." Rebecca dangled the syringe containing the antidote in front of Roberto's face, taunting him and causing him to cry out in desperation. Roberto felt like he was being pricked with 1,000 needles. The pain was excruciating, and being tied up and unable to move only made it worse. He moaned, looking at Rebecca pleadingly. "Why do you do this to me? Who do you work for?" She glared at him. "Just answer my question. If I find out you were involved in this, I guarantee that you'll be feeling much worse than this." Roberto couldn't believe she was the same quiet, unassuming, hard-working woman who had arrived at the lab just days ago. She had turned into a monster right before his very eyes. He knew he had no choice but to give her the information she wanted about Chester. "He was given a tranquilizer. The drug he was given to change his personality wasn't completely effective, and he started switching between two personalities. It messed up his nervous system. If you remove all the wires from his body, you could end up causing permanent neurological damage, though it won't be life-threatening. So what can we do to save him?" "There's nothing you can do. The lab researchers are conducting experiments on him. They give him sedatives to keep him unconscious. The drip is to make sure his physical condition doesn't deteriorate. He'll be here for a while." "And what's their goal?" Rebecca asked. "Do they want to see if they can control his mind?" Roberto shrugged. "They want to wipe out his memories and his original personality. They've almost succeeded. In a few days, he'll be an entirely different person." Rebecca's heart sank. "Is there any medication we can give to bring him back to his old self?" "Not that I know of. This field of medicine isn't very advanced. Very little research exists on it. It's easier to destroy someone's personality than to recreate it." Rebecca shook her head in frustration, thinking there was no way out for Callum. She went over to the steel table and leaned over him, wanting desperately to remove the mask from his face. Kyle knew they wouldn't get Roberto and didn't have any more information for them, so he took the antidote from Rebecca and administered it to Roberto. Ken, who had been silent up to this point, suddenly spoke. "It's almost time." Kyle turned to him. "Send the signal immediately." Roberto laughed bitterly. "It's too late. We should have sent the signal ages ago. They'll know that something is up. I'm sure they've already sent a lot of people this way to take care of you." As soon as he finished speaking, the alarm in the building went off, signaling that there were trespassers inside. Rebecca and Kyle exchanged frightened glances. They knew it meant that the building's security system would be activated and the doors would seal shut. Kyle removed the wires and tubes from Callum's body and then slung him on his back. Rebecca raised her fists and knocked Ken and Roberto out with 2 swift punches to the head. She desperately hoped that Kyle still had the special key code to unlock the doors so they could get out. Fortunately, they didn't have any problems leaving the lab room and taking Callum downstairs. They had just reached the first floor when they saw several security guards rushing toward them, guns in hand. Rebecca stood frozen on the spot as the men approached. She wondered if they were the lab security guards or henchmen who had been sent by the person in charge of experimenting on Callum. She recalled that a dozen strong men had carried the large crates over to the lab. The ones confronting them at the moment were vaguely familiar. They were carrying guns, and they looked menacing. She looked around in desperation, searching for an escape route. She knew that she and Kyle couldn't handle a dozen muscular thugs on their own, even if they knew how to fight. Besides, Kyle was carrying Callum, who weighed almost 200 pounds. The men inched closer, and gunshots rang out. As bullets whizzed past them, Kyle grabbed Rebecca's arm and pulled her into a narrow corridor. Their lives were hanging by a thread. Every second counted, and she knew they had to get out. As they fled toward the exit, she wondered who was behind the operation. She had already discounted certain people she had suspected of being part of the despicable operation when she had first arrived at the lab. She knew Katana and Jeremy were involved. They were just there to do research and make some extra money on the side. They were working for another group of researchers. Dr. Shananahan, the quiet, warm-hearted Shane, and the talented Roma were equally innocent. She knew Ken and Roberto were in on it, but she didn't think they were intelligent enough to have orchestrated it on their own. At that moment, Callum, who was still being carried on Kyle's back, suddenly moved. Rebecca became anxious. The last thing they needed was for her brother to wake up. She had no idea what personality he had been given or what to expect from him. For all she knew, he could easily turn on them. The thugs were still shooting at them, so they had to get out of there as quickly as possible. But Callum opened his eyes, immediately sensed the danger they were in, and jumped off Kyle's back. Kyle staggered for a moment, just as a bullet whizzed past his head, barely missing him. Rebecca was scared out of her wits. She grabbed her brother and pushed him out of the way. "Be careful or you'll be hit." As they ran along the corridor, she felt him reach into her pocket and take out her gun. A chill ran down her spine. She didn't dare think about what he wanted with the weapon. To her surprise, he and Kyle whipped around at the same time and confronted the thugs running after them. Like 2 well-trained assassins, they fired their guns. Before long, several men lay dead on the floor. Rebecca sighed with relief, realizing her brother wasn't their enemy after all. He was still the person she had grown up with and loved. She hoped the experiments hadn't damaged him too much. The remaining thugs shot back at them, angrier than ever. Rebecca noticed that reinforcements had arrived. She was certain that they weren't security guards. She looked at Kyle with a panicked expression. "What are we going to do? We're outnumbered." A bullet flew past Rebecca, nearly hitting her in the arm. She screamed. Kyle grabbed her and pushed her in front of him. "You and Callum go on ahead. I'll follow you. I'm going to try and distract them. She shook her head vehemently. No, Kyle, it's too dangerous. Come with us. You can't fight all of them on your own. Reinforcements just arrived. Maybe we should get help. It's too late for that. We need to get out of the building. Some of the guys have machine guns. Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it would jump out of her chest. She knew that the 3 men with their pistols were no match for a bunch of heavily armed men who were eager to kill. Just then, they saw a scuffle among their pursuers. One man dropped to the floor, clutching his chest. Becky, now's your chance, Kyle shouted. Make a run for it. He pointed his gun at the thugs and started shooting. He hit 3 of them. Rebecca grabbed Callum. They ran to the end of the corridor, down the stairs to the ground floor, and out of the building. Another gunfight was in full swing outside. Rebecca saw 2 men shooting at another group. One of them had exceptional marksmanship and didn't once miss his target. She watched as the 2 men ran toward the desert vehicle parked outside the building, and she suddenly realized that it was Oliver and Reggie. She assumed Oliver must have been worried about his son and had followed him back to the lab. When Oliver saw her and Callum, he waved at them. Quick, get in the car. Kyle burst out of the building just then, and the 3 of them piled into the car. Oliver handed Kyle the keys, and he sat next to him in the front. Rebecca, Callum, and Reggie got in the back. Kyle slammed his foot on the gas pedal, and they sped out of the compound as bullets whizzed past them. Callum and Oliver shot back at the men stationed outside the building. As they drove past the security gate, Rebecca breathed a sigh of relief. They were finally out of harm's way. She was about to ask Callum how he was feeling, but he had curled up in the back seat with his eyes closed. She glanced at Reggie beside him, who looked as if he were in pain. It was then that she noticed his shoulder was bleeding badly. Reggie, you've been shot! Don't move. Let me take a look at you. Oliver whipped around in astonishment when he heard that. Son, are you all right? When did this happen? Why didn't you say something earlier? Reggie's face was pale. I don't know when it happened. I didn't even notice till now. Rebecca rummaged in her bag for her medical supplies, and then she examined his wound. The bullet was wedged in his shoulder, and she knew she had to move it as quickly as possible. He gritted his teeth as she cleaned the area around the wound. He had never felt such excruciating pain. Suddenly, another henchman appeared out of nowhere and pointed his machine gun at them. Kyle swerved the car to the left and turned off the headlights and taillights so they couldn't be seen in the dark. Shots rang out in the stillness of the night. Rebecca tried to ignore it, focusing on Reggie. She slapped him gently on the face. Stay with me. Whatever you do, don't close your eyes. Talk to me. He nodded numbly. How did you do in the final exams? She asked him. He was slightly surprised by her question. You mean for the classes I took? She nodded. Yes, the courses you were telling me about. What specific subjects did you take? He broke out in a cold sweat. There was macroeconomics, a course in finance, another one in international trade. Before he could finish, Rebecca removed the bullet with a pair of tweezers. He screamed in agony. After removing the bullet from Reggie's shoulder, Rebecca quickly put pressure on the wound with a cloth to stop the bleeding. Just relax. The hard part's over. You'll feel better after I clean it and stitch it up. Just close your eyes and try not to think about it. She poured a bit of alcohol in a cotton ball and applied it to the injury. The road was bumpy, however, so it took her a while before she managed to suture the open wound. They were getting further away from the lab and their enemies, and the sound of gunshots had vanished. Only then did Oliver turn around to see how his son was doing. He looked at him with a worried expression. How are you feeling? Reggie shrugged. Bit better. Rebecca removed the bullet. He looked at her with adoration as she wiped away the remaining blood on his shoulder. She was so focused on the task at hand that she didn't notice him gazing at her. He marveled at how beautiful and soft her skin looked in the dim light, and his heart skipped a beat. The pain in his shoulder had subsided and had been replaced by numbness, but he could feel the blood rushing to his head. He was close enough to kiss her. He wished Kyle would accelerate so she would fall into his arms. Reggie willed himself to stop thinking such silly thoughts. They had almost gotten killed, and Kyle was sitting in the front seat. He knew he couldn't make a pass at Rebecca just then. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes. Oliver was relieved to see he was feeling better. At that moment, Callum woke up again and began loading bullets into his gun. Everyone was shocked. He was expressionless as he pointed the gun at Rebecca's head. She was still holding the tweezers and the cotton ball in her hand, and she had her back to him. A shiver ran down her spine when she felt her brother press the cold gun barrel to her temple. She didn't move, and she spoke calmly. "Chester, what are you doing?" He narrowed his eyes and frowned. "You know my name?" "Of course. Don't you know who I am?" When he didn't respond, she slowly turned her head to look at him. "Don't you recognize me?" He peered at her, and then he shrugged. "I think I've seen you before." He continued to hold the gun steadily to her head. Oliver and Kyle were listening in the front seats, not daring to do anything rash. Kyle slowed the car down, and they instinctively put their hands on their guns. Rebecca pleaded with Callum. "Can you please put the gun down, Chester? You know who I am. You saved me, remember? You remind me so much of my brother. I feel we have a strong connection." But Callum didn't move. Instead, he cocked the pistol. Reggie held his breath, wondering what to do. Though his shoulder was still hurting, he knew he had to do something before Callum killed Rebecca. He raised his good arm to grab the gun from him when she suddenly stopped him. He was stunned. She looked at him with a serious expression, indicating that she didn't want him to get involved. Callum's finger was on the trigger. One slight move was all it would take to send a bullet through Rebecca's skull. Rebecca was still gripping Reggie's wrist. Anxious, he whispered, "What are you doing? Why didn't you let me stop him? He's dangerous. He's not your brother anymore." Kyle looked at Callum in the rearview mirror. "Chester, do you recognize me?" The latter glanced into the mirror. Before he could reply, Kyle suddenly stepped on the gas pedal, sending Rebecca flying into Reggie's arms. Right on cue, Oliver took his pistol out of his pocket, turned around in his seat, and pointed it at Callum. The latter instantly reacted by pointing the barrel of his gun at the back of Kyle's head. "Don't move or I'll shoot. I'll kill you all if I have to." Reggie held onto Rebecca tightly, praying they would get out of the situation alive. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. Rebecca reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his gun, putting her finger to her lips to keep him quiet. He didn't dare move. Kyle continued driving, knowing Callum's gun was pointed at him. He held his breath, hoping Callum wouldn't do anything crazy. To make matters worse, Rebecca had been busy tending to Reggie all that time. Kyle knew how Reggie felt about his girlfriend. His emotions alternated between fear, jealousy, and intense anger. As he turned a corner, Rebecca suddenly pointed Reggie's gun at Callum's head. He didn't seem bothered at all, however, and laughed menacingly. "Go ahead. I'm not afraid of you." Just then, he felt a sharp jab in his arm. He looked down to see Rebecca holding a needle in her other hand. Before he could react, she stabbed him again. His arm went numb. The sensation quickly spread to the rest of his body. Kyle, who was watching everything in the rearview mirror, slammed on the brakes, turned around, and snatched the gun from Callum. Rebecca was about to knock Callum out, but Kyle beat her to it. He punched him in the face so hard that he immediately passed out in the back seat. He then grabbed a rope from the glove compartment and quickly tied Callum's hands. Rebecca was shocked. She couldn't believe her brother had tried to kill her. She was amazed at how Kyle had handled the situation. She even forgot that she was still pressed up against Reggie. She stared at Kyle in awe, forever grateful that he had saved her life again. Kyle's moves had been textbook, but Rebecca had never seen him do them with such speed. Before she could say anything, he had pulled her out of Reggie's arms. He was frowning and had a foul expression on his face as he carried her away. Oliver sighed. He had already moved from the front passenger seat to change with Rebecca. Without Rebecca in his arms, Reggie suddenly felt bereft. but he hadn't tried to keep her there. He sat with a deliberately blank look on his face while Oliver settled in beside him. Kyle helped Rebecca into the front passenger seat and continued driving without saying a word. She felt a little annoyed by his unnecessarily macho display. She had only fallen onto Reggie because Kyle had accelerated so suddenly. She stole a glance at Kyle and noticed in the dim light that he was holding his jaw taut. He kept his gaze focused in front of him, and he didn't look in her direction at all. The situation suddenly seemed funny. She was about to laugh when she felt his hand slide into hers. He held onto it tightly and gave her no chance to pull away. She found herself unable to move. Her irritation returned, but she couldn't extradite herself and had no choice but to acquiesce. She put her energy into glaring at him instead, but he still didn't look at her. He just continued to look at the road in front of him. She turned to the others in the car. She didn't want to make a fuss and decided to ignore Kyle for a while. Huge thanks to the both of you. Kyle didn't say anything, but Oliver replied. Are you sure it's Callum? Yes, I'm sure. I need to let my father know as soon as possible. With her free hand, she found her phone and called Jonathan. It was late at night, and he was probably asleep, but the Do Not Disturb setting didn't apply to his children, so he answered straight away. Rebecca got right to the point. Dad, I found Chester, and I think he might be Callum. We're in Chile. We're at the biological research base. Jonathan inhaled shakily. Okay, I'm on my way. After hanging up, Rebecca turned back to Oliver. Are you going to head home now? Oliver had gone to their aid because of Callum. He had hoped to ease the relationship between him and Jonathan, but he felt that his job was done, so he didn't see the need for his continuing presence. He had also completed the business he had gone to Chile for. Yes, we'll fly out tomorrow morning. Thank you so much for what you've done. I'll have to stay and finish the mission, so I won't be able to see you off. But when Dad arrives, I'll tell him exactly what you did for us. While they had been talking, Kyle had pulled up at Rebecca's dorm. They each had ideas about who the mole was, but neither of them was completely sure. That meant that the mission was incomplete and that they couldn't leave. It was obvious that the mole was also secretly recruiting help, but they knew that he or she couldn't reveal themselves, even if they suspected the two of them were undercover. Kyle knew the mole wouldn't take any chances and that they would be relatively safe at the dorm. After Rebecca had spoken, Kyle's jaw relaxed a little. It was too much for Reggie, though, who broke his silence. Rebecca, it's too dangerous. Come back with us. Rebecca looked at Kyle out of the corner of his eye as she thought about how to respond to Reggie. When I chose this profession, I knew the potential dangers. I can't guarantee that I'll be absolutely safe, but I can assure you that I'll do my best to protect myself. He couldn't ignore the light shining behind her eyes as she spoke, and he felt the burning sensation in his chest. He nodded. I understand. They quietly went upstairs to Kyle's room, with Kyle carrying Callum. They stopped at Rebecca's room on the way so she could collect some of her medical equipment to treat Reggie's wound. Everyone was quiet, and the only sound was Kyle using his phone to contact their colonel. When the conversation was over, Kyle moved across to assess the wound in Reggie's shoulder. He raised one eyebrow slightly as he looked at Reggie's upper body. Sensing contempt in Kyle's eyes, Reggie looked down at his body and then stole a glance at Kyle's chest and arms. So many complex emotions ran through him. Kyle had been in the army for years and had trained hard for all of them. Reggie knew that he would never compare physically unless he did the same. He took a deep breath and stifled his swirling emotions. Thank you, Rebecca. She waved his words away. I should be the one thanking you. You didn't need to come today, but you did. You saved us and my brother, and you were injured in the process. It was because of me that something happened to Callum. He looked across at the man they had rescued. If he really is Callum, I'll get rid of some of my guilt. As he spoke, he attempted to use one hand to button his shirt, but he was hampered by pain. He inhaled sharply. Kyle walked over. I'll help you. Rebecca said nothing as she watched Kyle help Reggie button up his shirt. she felt moved by his kindness. She turned and saw Oliver making his way to her side. Ask your father if he needs any more support. It'll take him hours to get here from the States, so I can stay until he does. Thanks, but we'll be fine. Kyle's contacted the troops to request support. They should be here in half an hour. Oliver nodded. Okay, as long as you'll be safe. Kyle suddenly stopped what he was doing and looked at Reggie inquiringly. Do you have any meat on you? Reggie looked piercingly up at him. Kyle did up the final button and gently patted his shoulder. He leaned in close to Reggie's ear. Even if you put in 5 years of hard training, you won't catch up to me. Reggie rocketed to his feet because Kyle's words had ignited something within him. His eyes locked onto Kyle's. We won't know who the winner is until the end, will we? Kyle's response was a slightly surprised smile. Is that so? I'll wait and see. He liked that type of challenge. Rebecca hadn't heard what had been said, but when she turned away from Oliver, she immediately sensed tension between Kyle and Reggie. Kyle noticed her looking at them. Everything's been dealt with. She nodded slowly. Reggie, let's go, Oliver said. All right. Reggie nodded at Rebecca. He wanted to say something, but he knew that nothing would change even if he did. He turned and left quietly. After returning to his room, Reggie lay down for a rest and thought about what Rebecca had said. His mind went back to when she was young, and he remembered a joint excursion into the mountains to find herbs to help Bruno. He suddenly felt depressed. He knew that she had never been on the same path as him, and that she was getting further and further away. He couldn't help but be attracted to her, even though she was completely different from him. He had tried to stay away, but their paths kept crossing again and again. Knowing and understanding something was one thing, but accepting it emotionally was another. He knew, deep down, that he wouldn't be the one laughing in the end, but he wasn't sure that he cared. He thought back to something that he had once read. A person should have at least one time in their life where they meet someone that makes them forget themselves, where they give admiration and don't seek anything in return. That sort of relationship can be the most beautiful. He wondered if what he had with Rebecca was already enough. He closed his eyes and silently waited for time to pass. Time did move on, and they finally heard the sound of an engine from outside. Reggie was sure it was Kyle's reinforcements and that they would be in contact soon. Once he and Oliver had left Kyle's room, things had deviated from the way Reggie had hoped them to go. Rebecca had been going to head back to her own room, but she was stopped by Kyle as she was moving toward the door. He pulled her backward, and she fell into his arms. He moved forward and pressed her up against the wall. She felt instantly overwhelmed by his physicality and was about to protest when he moved even closer. She felt completely consumed by him. She tried to reach out and create some space between them, but he grabbed her hands and raised them above her head. He kissed her fiercely and felt as though all the air around her was being sucked away. She tried to make a sound to alert him, but he ignored her efforts and continued to kiss her crazily. Her heart was beating like a drum because he was behaving slightly out of character. It wasn't the first time they had kissed, but the passion behind it was suffocating her. She felt as though she couldn't move at all. It wasn't long before both of them were out of breath. Kyle retreated a little, but his eyes were still stormy. If he wasn't your brother, I would have reprimanded you for being so reckless. Rebecca was stunned by his outburst. She had thought that Kyle was jealous because of Reggie, but it suddenly didn't seem so clear-cut. I won't allow you to go on missions again if you continue to be so impulsive, he added. Rebecca was highly aggravated. You'll blacklist me from future missions? I'll tell Colonel Hunter. You have his backing, do you? Kyle placed his finger against her lips. But that would be pointless anyway, because I'll tell your father that you have no regard for your own safety when you carry out missions. Rebecca blinked. You'd use my father's love against me? I can try. His lips moved closer to hers again, but not quite close enough to make contact. He should be here in a few hours, right? Rebecca gritted her teeth with frustration, and her eyes widened. Dad will listen to me. In anything but this. Kyle gently tightened his arms around her until she was completely enveloped again. Please listen to those of us who care about you. Rebecca pouted and didn't say anything more. She wasn't sure if Kyle was acting as he was because he was jealous or because he was scared. He didn't say anything further and sank into the quiet cuddle. Everything was silent. Callum remained motionless where he lay. Rebecca had been in Kyle's arms for a while before she voiced her lingering fear. Who do you think is the spy? Dr. Lyle Shananahan and Shane are acting very suspiciously. You know about Lyle's situation, and I've seen Shane's hands. They're quite interesting. Shane has a lot of scars and calluses on his hands. I know some of the other researchers also have them. It's an occupational hazard from the chemicals and equipment they work with, but his are different. Rebecca was puzzled. Different how? I got a good look at Roberto and Ken's hands today. They do experiments all year round, and they joined the lab long before Shane, but even their calluses and marks aren't as bad as his, and they're not in the same place. So what do you think Shane's scars are from? Guns. His calluses are the same as the ones I have from rifle training, which I find very suspicious for someone who works in a lab. As for Dr. Shananahan, I'm not sure about him. Something seems off about him, but Colonel Hunter has looked into him many times and hasn't found anything. Then he must be really good at hiding whatever it is he's up to. I still don't understand why he knocked me out and placed me back at my desk, or how he has such good stealth skills. Maybe he was trying to protect you, Kyle suggested. Maybe he was worried that something would happen to you if you continued snooping. As for the second question, I don't know the answer either. Neither of them could be sure of anything, so they continued to analyze the problem as best they could until Kyle received news of their compatriot's arrival. They were soon surrounded by American forces that melded into the darkness. Jonathan arrived the next morning, just as Oliver and Reggie were leaving the base. His helicopter landed on the empty space in front of the dorm, and Jonathan and Norman stepped out. A large contingent of bodyguards followed, and they split to guard both sides of the entrance and corridor. Jonathan and Norman went straight to Kyle's room and saw Callum lying on the floor. Jonathan was sure that it was his son as soon as he saw the prostrate figure. His eyes darkened, and the fire inside him burned stronger than ever. If it really was Callum, then he would make the perpetrators pay for taking his son. Dad, do you think it's Callum? Rebecca asked. I'll take him for a DNA test immediately. He looked at her with his eyebrows raised. Isn't this the biological research base? A simple gene assessment shouldn't be a problem for them, right? Rebecca and Kyle both instantly understood that Jonathan wanted the DNA test done at the base to alert the perpetrators that he was onto them. Jonathan took the opportunity to have a good look at his daughter. He swept his eyes over her from top to bottom to reassure himself that she was fine. Rebecca let out a sigh of relief. She felt fortunate that she had taken a shower the night before and was in a clean set of clothes. She had also slept for a while before making her way back to Kyle's room. She was worried that if Jonathan saw any traces of blood, or if she looked too tired, he wouldn't want her to stay. Kyle handed a tablet to Jonathan. These are the specifics. Jonathan nodded and sat down to read. Norman had made himself busy by checking on Callum. He studied the mark on Callum's neck and took out the reagent they had prepared. He poured a small amount onto Callum's neck to test it. When there was no reaction from the layer of human skin covering Callum's own, he frowned. The situation was even more troublesome than he had expected. It seemed like the bond with the biological reagent base was quite deeply rooted. He tried a few more things, but they were all ineffective. They decided it was time for Rebecca and Kyle to go to work. The two of them went straight to the base building, which was filled with their colleagues. Many of them were already set up for the day. The remnants of the night before had long since been cleaned up. With no bullets or bloodstains, it was as if nothing had happened, but everyone knew that something unusual had occurred. Lyle arrived at the same time as Rebecca, and they greeted each other with smiles, as if nothing were amiss. They all sat down in tacit understanding. At 9 o'clock, Rebecca looked around. Other than Roberto and Ken, everyone had arrived. Although Roberto had been poisoned the day before, he had quickly been injected with the antidote. Kyle and Rebecca were expecting him to be okay and to be back at work soon. However, he and Ken had also entered the high-class laboratory without permission, and they were facing an official warning. It was likely that they had both been diverted to the base's security center. An hour later, Lyle received a phone call and got up. "Becca, follow me, please. I need your help with an experiment." She nodded, and as they approached the door to one of the guest rooms, they heard a conversation coming from inside. Rebecca smiled and walked in. The base commander, the CEO, and Jonathan sat facing each other, having an animated discussion. Jonathan was looking at the information in front of him, and the CEO was talking him through it. The research facility had been built by Americans. The Davis Group was known to be at the top of their game in the U.S., so they were hoping to do a successful business deal. More business deals meant extra income and bonuses for every staff member at the base. Rebecca and Dr. Shananahan entered the room together. He was handsome and elegant, and she was delicate and beautiful. They made a pretty picture, and even the CEO, who was responsible for introducing them, was taken aback. He felt flustered and raced through the meet and greet. Jonathan nodded slightly and met Rebecca's eyes. Rebecca found the subterfuge fun and inclined her head in the same way. She took advantage when the others were looking away and winked to Jonathan. He couldn't help but laugh quietly. Love for his daughter swelled in his heart. After exchanging pleasantries, Dr. Shananahan explained the research they were doing to Jonathan, and Rebecca prepared to start the experiment. Jonathan listened intently while casually sizing up the scientist. The man was well-spoken and had a calm demeanor, making him seem quite charming. Jonathan glanced at Dr. Shananahan's hands as Rebecca experimented. He noticed that his hands were smooth and delicate, lacking any calluses or blemishes, like someone who didn't do much work with them. Jonathan recalled what Kyle had told him that morning. He had said that the lab scientists usually had damaged skin on their hands from years of working with metal instruments, wearing latex gloves, and constant hand-washing with abrasive antibacterial soaps. Dr. Shananahan's hands were as delicate as a woman's. Jonathan looked away without batting an eye and began talking to the CEO. They spoke business for a while, until Jonathan broached a different subject. "I need your help with something specific." The CEO lifted his eyebrows with interest. "Of course, Mr. Davis. What can we do for you?" He was keen on establishing a good relationship with Jonathan. Jonathan leaned forward. "I've brought 2 genetic samples along. Will you be able to determine if the subjects are related?" The CEO nodded eagerly. "Yeah. We have the facilities to perform genetic testing. It's quite a simple procedure. Am I right in saying so, Dr. Shananahan?" Dr. Shananahan smiled. He didn't flinch, nor was there any significant change in expression on his face. "Yeah, we can give you a result in about 3 hours or less." Jonathan nodded. "Wonderful. Thank you." He opened his briefcase and took out 2 sealed test tubes. Rebecca printed labels indicating the type of test required, stuck them around the test tubes, and handed the samples to Dr. Shananahan. "Thank you, Becca. Why don't you come to the lab with me and observe the procedure?" They went to their lab, and Dr. Shananahan called everyone together. "Please stop what you're doing and follow me to the high-security lab." His instructions surprised everyone because they weren't allowed to enter the high-security labs. Only selected staff were permitted to work there. Dr. Shananahan noticed a few staff members look at him bewilderedly, so he explained why. "A new client has asked for a genetic identification procedure. They're visiting our facility today and will wait for the results. The client is the CEO of the Davis Group, so I'm sure you understand the importance of providing superb service. It's also a good opportunity for many of you to learn about such procedures." Everyone had a different reaction to the news. Rebecca and Kyle looked at each other, but kept their expressions neutral. Roma's eyes showed a hint of surprise, but it quickly disappeared and she seemed indifferent. Jeremy seemed stunned. His usual stoic expression vanished and a glimmer of concern flashed in his eyes before he lowered his head and looked down at his feet. Katana's eyes went wide and she grinned with excitement. The young woman's imagination ran wild as she envisioned discovering a melodramatic secret about a notorious, powerful, and wealthy family. Shane didn't seem fazed by the instruction, but then his brows drew together as if something had occurred to him, and his mouth gaped open in shock. Rebecca studied everyone's reactions, and an idea popped into her mind. Everyone didn't need to participate in or observe the gene identification procedure. Dr. Shananahan had to have summoned everyone for a reason. The more she thought about it, the more she began to believe that he had done it deliberately so that she could gauge everyone's reactions. She gazed at him and noticed how he remained calm and collected. He caught her gaze and smiled pleasantly. "Becca, you and Kylan may join. You should find it interesting." Rebecca nodded. "Thank you, Dr. Shananahan. We'd very much like to see how it's done." Dr. Shananahan led his team to a high-security lab and assigned everyone a task except for Rebecca and Kyle. They stood aside and observed as everyone got to work. Katana operated one of the more sophisticated machines, and her excitement was evident. She had only been allowed to perform C-level lab procedures and was thrilled to work in a more equipped lab. Jeremy oversaw her work and occasionally gave her a few tips. Shane looked around and frowned. "Has anyone seen Ken and Roberto?" Katana kept her eyes focused on her task at hand and replied without looking up. "They did a report for work this morning. I heard that they're sick. Maybe it was something they ate." Shane gave her a half smile. "Is that so? I've been so busy this morning that I didn't notice they were absent until now. I'll go and check in on them later today." Katana grunted softly and continued to work. Jeremy briefly glanced at Shane and then focused on Katana again. Kyle had been observing them and had overheard their conversation. Jeremy and Shane's subtle facial expressions were just enough for him. He instantly knew what was going on. The procedure went faster than expected, most likely because so many people had participated, and Roma announced the result. She pointed to a large monitor mounted on the wall as she loaded the results. "As you can see by the data displayed on the screen, it's evident that the samples indicate a clear relationship between the subjects. In this instance, the relationship is paternal. The subjects are father and son." She smiled proudly and turned to Dr. Shananahan. "Shall I prepare a formal report?" Dr. Shananahan shook his head. "There's no need. The client's waiting in the lounge downstairs. Print the results and we'll deliver it to him personally." Roma nodded and hurried over to the printer. The rest of the team cleaned their workstations and packed away the instruments they had been using. Dr. Shananahan's gaze drifted toward Rebecca. "Becca, you may deliver the results to Mr. Davis." He handed her the printout that Roma had given him. Rebecca's heart had started to beat wildly, and she focused on keeping a docile expression. "Yeah, of course." She wanted to jump up and down and scream with joy. It really was Callum, without a doubt. Even though his facial features had been altered, she had always known it was him. They had spent 9 months sharing a womb and had experienced the happiest childhood growing up together. It was impossible for her not to have recognized her brother. The stress and worry that had plagued her for many months began to ease. Although Callum's situation was precarious, the fact that they had found him alive was a good start. They would deal with the consequences later. Rebecca hurried out of the lab and didn't waste time sending Jonathan the news. She pulled her phone out of her pocket and sent him a message. "It's him." She then went to the lounge and handed him the report. "Mr. Davis, thank you for your patience. Dr. Shananahan asked me to deliver this to you." Her phone beeped, and she saw an incoming message from Kyle. "I know who it is." Her father studied her facial expression as she read the message and quickly replied, "Okay, give me details later." Jonathan waited for her to put her phone away. "Is everything okay?" She smiled as if nothing was wrong, but answered in a whisper. Kyle says he knows who the traitor is. Jonathan nodded. If they knew who the spy was, they would be able to keep an eye on him, and he would hopefully lead them to the mastermind in Bolivia. The rest of the day was uneventful, and everyone kept to themselves and focused on their work. After work, Kyle headed to the gym to exercise. He was busy on the bench press when he saw Jeremy enter. Jeremy didn't acknowledge him. Instead, he walked straight to the locker room without saying a word. Every part of the research facility was state-of-the-art, including the gym. The locker room had individual cubicles, each with a locker, bench, wash basin, and shower. A few minutes later, Jeremy reappeared wearing a t-shirt and sports shorts. His face seemed slightly different, as if something subtle about him had changed. He walked toward the treadmill and was about to start running when he noticed Kyle approaching him. Kyle grinned and mocked him. "Hey, traitor, are you sure those are your shorts?" Jeremy lowered his head and was about to look at his shorts when he realized what Kyle had called him. He looked up at Kyle with a frown. "I think you've mistaken me for someone else." His voice was rough and deeper than usual. Kyle raised his eyebrows. "Nah, I don't think so. I'd say you've just been exposed." While Rebecca and the others had tried to guess who the spy was, Kyle had hit the nail on the head. Kyle wanted to make the man nervous. He stepped closer to him. "It's rather odd that you're being so defensive. You gave it away in the lab today. Shane knew Ken and Roberto were absent. How could he not have noticed all morning? You'd normally have told him off for being so ignorant, but instead, you glanced at him, and your expression said it all." Jeremy's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Kyle continued. "You did a good job hiding out in the open. Having sea-level access made you seem like the rest of us, so no one would ever suspect you to work in the high-security labs. But your reaction today, when Dr. Shanahan instructed everyone to work in the high-security lab, raised my suspicions. I've been observing you for a while. You wouldn't usually have been surprised by Dr. Shanahan's instructions." Kyle locked eyes with Jeremy's. "Even if you had been surprised, you would have hidden it. But today, you didn't. You're not a very good actor. That's when I realized you weren't the real Jeremy." Jeremy's face contorted as he realized he had compromised himself. He glared at Kyle and sneered. "You're ruthless." Kyle didn't flinch. "You're quite smart. How did you know I had already figured it out?" He knew Jeremy was suspicious of him, but first had to confirm whether he had been exposed. Jeremy's appearance in the gym had been planned. Kyle was sure Jeremy would have already tried to run away if he hadn't had to confirm what Kyle knew first. Jeremy had too much at stake to disappear without a good reason. Jeremy narrowed his eyes and gritted his teeth. "I saw how you treated your girlfriend today." His rugged appearance faded, and a sinister look gleamed in his eyes. Kyle suddenly burst out laughing. Jeremy's observation was spot on. Kyle would usually eat with Rebecca. They would hold hands and cozy up to each other while waiting in the queue for their meals, and then they would sit together at a table. Kyle often worked extra hours and would hug Rebecca before leaving the canteen. Sometimes he would pull her into a shadowy corner and kiss her. But that day, Kyle had only hugged her briefly before he had whispered something in her ear and rushed off. He didn't know whether he should laugh or cry. He gave Jeremy a half shrug. "Yeah, I suppose I'm also not much of an actor." Because of the urgency of the matter, he hadn't had time to cuddle and coo with Rebecca. Also, Jonathan had been there. He had been worried that Jonathan would want to break his legs if he had seen him hug and kiss Rebecca. He sighed and clicked his neck. "I'd really like to know how you managed to get Shane, Ken, and Roberto to work for you." Jeremy sneered and gave him a sinister laugh. "Money talks. It's amazing how cooperative someone can be when presented with a generous sum of cash." He glared at Kyle with dark eyes, and the corner of his lips curled into a grotesque smile. "Since I've answered your questions, maybe you could answer one of mine. In fact, I only have one question for you. Your pretty little girlfriend looks like she could be quite hot under the sheets. Am I right?" Kyle felt the hairs on his neck prickle and his blood begin to boil. He felt his anger rise and his self-control wane. Suddenly, he grabbed Jeremy's hand and twisted it. Jeremy's eyes widened as his bones cracked and the blood drained from his face. Kyle pulled him closer and scowled. "If only you knew. It's a pity you don't have much of an imagination." He narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Do you know what's also a pity? The pharmacist from the research lab who died in a car accident on the way to the detention center. I found out recently that he was the real Jeremy." A look of disdain washed over Jeremy. Kyle lowered his voice. "But luckily, there was also a survivor." Beads of sweat gathered on Jeremy's forehead from the pain in his arm. He curled his lip and sneered. "I don't believe a soldier would avoid taking advantage of such a pretty girl. Why would you torture yourself like that?" Kyle glared at him with dark eyes. "What's wrong with a bit of torture?" He tightened his grip around Jeremy's hand. "Who knows what happens behind closed doors?" Jeremy's eyes widened with fear. He clenched his jaw to cope with the pain in his arm and suddenly swung his free arm toward Kyle. He was holding a small pouch of powdery substance in his hand and aimed for Kyle's face. Kyle had been expecting Jeremy to try something like that and quickly closed his eyes and held his breath. At the same time, he pushed Jeremy backward and pressed him to the ground with his foot. The commotion attracted the attention of other people who were also working out. The fine powder filled the air, and the people began to gasp for air. Panic set in, and they flailed about, desperately trying to get out of the gym. Although Kyle had anticipated that Jeremy might attack him with a neurotoxin, holding his breath wasn't enough to prevent the toxin from entering his airway, and he also began to gasp. Jeremy used the opportunity to squirm free and hurried through the open door. Kyle quickly chased after him. His breathing had become labored, and his eyes burned. He caught Jeremy by the arm, and the two men wrestled each other in the hallway. Kyle reached for his gun that was hidden underneath his t-shirt. At the same time, Jeremy reached for a gun strapped around his ankle. They stood facing each other. Each one had a gun pressed against the other's temples. Jeremy wasn't in a hurry to shoot. He laughed at Kyle. "You fool. Did you think you could avoid the neurotoxin just by holding your breath? You'll soon find it harder and harder to breathe. You'll die if you don't find the antidote in time. And it doesn't look like that's going to happen." Kyle glared at him, ready to pull the trigger. Jeremy reached out and grabbed Kyle's hand, surprised to find it was as steady as a rock. He saw a bead of sweat roll down Kyle's face and laughed again. "Yeah, it's just as I expected. You're not as invincible as you think you are. The toxin has worked its way into your respiratory system, and it's only a matter of time now." Just as Jeremy was about to yank Kyle's gun out of his hand, he felt a sharp pain in his wrist and found himself being flung against the wall. Then, without a warning, Jeremy heard the muffled sound of a bullet charging through a silencer, and the muscles in his calf tore open. He fell to the ground and writhed in pain. He looked up and saw two figures standing in the distance. At the end of the hallway, Jonathan slipped a smoking gun into its holster and gestured for Norman to restrain Jeremy. Kyle gasped for air. His face had already started to turn red. His eyes were bulging, and he buckled over. Jonathan hurried over to him. Between short breaths, Kyle stammered. "Mr. Davis, it's a neurotoxin. I need the antidote. I don't have much time." Jonathan was about to call out for Norman when Rebecca appeared in the hallway. She put her arms around Kyle's waist and gently made him sit down. "Stay here. I'll call Dr. Shananahan." Jonathan watched with shock as his daughter quickly took Kyle's pulse and positioned his body in the recovery position. She then took her phone out of her pocket. "Dr. Shananahan, we're near the gym. Please hurry. It's an emergency. Bring oxygen tanks." Jonathan pinched the bridge of his nose and called out to Norman. "Take Jeremy away and send the others in to protect Rebecca and Kyle." He squeezed Rebecca's shoulder. It's going to be okay. Then he hurried after Norman. Soon, Rebecca and Kyle were left in the hallway with only a few bodyguards who had arrived and had surrounded them. Rebecca held Kyle's hand and rubbed his back to keep him calm. All she could do was wait for Dr. Shananahan. Kyle's throat made a rasping sound as he struggled to breathe. He looked up at Rebecca. "Becky, I'm so glad you're here. It's going to be okay. Don't look so nervous." Rebecca had been concerned when she had found Kyle and Jonathan in the hallway. She hadn't wanted to appear too comfortable around Kyle because she knew her father would immediately see that they were in love, and she was afraid of how he would react. Kyle reached out and grabbed her hand. He recognized the fear in her eyes and could tell it wasn't only because of his breathing, but also because of Jonathan. He found it rather endearing. Dr. Shananahan arrived with Roma and Katana. Katana leaned over and injected Kyle to stabilize him before placing an oxygen mask over his face. She then drew a blood sample and handed it to Roma to analyze. Dr. Shananahan treated the other people who had been exposed to the neurotoxin in the gym. Rebecca watched in awe as she realized that Dr. Shananahan used the same techniques Helga had taught her. His gaze caught hers, and he smiled faintly as he noticed she was still rubbing Kyle's neck. It was as if they had an unspoken understanding in that brief moment. Rebecca focused on Kyle again, but couldn't stop wondering about Dr. Shananahan. He was a celebrated scientist with a PhD in biology and was also skilled in alternative medicine. What else don't we know about him? She wondered. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she was sure there was more to him than he let on. As her thoughts wandered, she felt Kyle pull her closer to him. She looked at him with concern. "What's wrong?" He drew her closer and whispered, "Tell your father to interrogate Jeremy properly. Ask him to find out about the calluses on Shane's hands." She nodded. "Yeah, okay. I'll let him know right away." She looked at him in his exhausted state. "Try to relax now." Kyle held her hand limply. "Okay." A team of medical personnel wheeled the affected people on gurneys into the elevator for further treatment. Dr. Shananahan gathered his team and immediately began analyzing the neurotoxin. He also called for security to escort Roberto and Ken to the lab. Due to the nature and urgency of the situation, he needed all the help he could get. Jonathan and Norman dragged Jeremy out of the building using a side entrance. Norman had wrapped Jeremy's leg in a bandage to stop the bleeding and had to support him as they hurried to a secret hideout to interrogate them. They didn't have much time because Jeremy was the person the army had been searching for, and they had to return him to Kyle so that he could follow protocol. Kyle's superiors would need to be notified, and he and Rebecca would have to complete their mission. They climbed into an SUV and raced across the desert toward their hideout. Soon, Jonathan and the 6 cars trailing behind them disappeared in the distance. Jonathan gazed out the window at the endless dunes. He heard his phone beep and quickly took it out of his pocket. It was a message from Rebecca. "Ask him about Shane. Kyle saw calluses on his hands similar to those that gunmen have." "Okay, I'll let you know." He turned to Norman. "How's he doing?" "He's been tranquilized. We've had a vial of poison in his mouth, but we were able to take it out before he bit down on it. We've stopped the bleeding, and he's stable for now." Jonathan nodded and glanced at Callum, slumped against the seat's backrest. He hadn't wanted any more drama with Callum, so he asked Norman to sedate him. Callum slept peacefully. Jonathan gazed at his son, and although his facial features were unfamiliar because of the facial mask, he felt a sense of familiarity that only a father could have for his son. Suddenly, the roar of a plane's engine at full throttle reverberated through the air. Sand flew up around the convoy of SUVs as an airplane skimmed above them. Jonathan and Norman looked at each other, and they both instantly knew what was going on. Jonathan was impressed that his adversaries had sent a plane after him so quickly. He was more curious than ever to find out who had been behind the entire operation, and he vowed to strangle them with his bare hands for what they had done to his son. "Norman, send out our fighter jets," he ordered. "But I want the pilot captured alive. Tell the others to clear the area immediately." Norman nodded. He picked up his radio and conveyed his boss's instructions. Within minutes, several black fighter jets appeared on the horizon, flying at incredible speed. They quickly intercepted the enemy aircraft targeting Jonathan's motorcade. Jonathan breathed a sigh of relief. Well, at least that's one thing out of the way. Now we need to find out who the others are and capture them. I hope this will be over soon. A couple of hours later, the motorcade arrived at another base, where a few other fighter jets and some off-road desert vehicles were stationed. There were a few low-rise buildings in the area. Jonathan asked one of his men to help carry Callum, while Norman dragged Jeremy to the basement. Jeremy had been scared that he would be taken to the army, but he realized then that that wasn't the plan. He was escorted to a dismal-looking room with no windows, where Norman shoved him into a chair under a single light bulb dangling from the ceiling. Norman then tied his hands and feet with rope and examined him for traces of poison. After confirming there were none, Jonathan confronted Jeremy. He looked at the wrinkles on his neck and frowned. I must admit, the technology isn't bad, but your face still looks strange. Something's off. He raised his hand to rip the mask off when Jeremy shouted, No, please, not like this. There's a specific technique for removing it. He was afraid Jonathan would rip his skin off along with the mask. Jonathan smiled. It was the information he wanted. So this means it's not permanent. I'm happy to hear that. Tell me about this technique so we can remove Chester's mask. Jeremy didn't dare play games. You need a special ointment. I don't have any on me, but you can make it yourself. You just need a few simple ingredients. He told them the list of ingredients and how to prepare the formulation. Jonathan turned to Norman. Get someone to make the ointment pronto. We'll try it out on this piece of shit first. He then turned back to Jeremy. Tell me about Shane. I know he was in on this with you. Jeremy was stunned. He hadn't expected him to know about Shane. He knew there was no way around the truth. Shane used to be a doctor for the mercenaries, but he was forced to leave after committing a crime. Rebecca, who was listening to the conversation through a radio transmitter back at the lab, was shocked. She had suspected Shane was a traitor from the very beginning, but never in a million years would she have guessed that he had been a mercenary. Her thoughts drifted to Dr. Shananahan, and she recalled how much he had known about the members of his team and what they had been doing behind the scenes. He hadn't seemed the least bit surprised, and she wondered why he hadn't exposed them. She shook her head with frustration. There were so many mysteries to solve. Rebecca turned her attention back to the interrogation. So you and Shane were mercenaries together? Jonathan asked Jeremy. Jeremy nodded. Yeah, but he was a real coward. We were never close. Then who approached you to be part of this operation? None of us who are part of it know one another's identities. It was part of the deal to ensure everyone's safety. Jonathan shook his head. I don't buy it. As soon as we kidnapped you, they sent a plane to kill you. Why would they do that if you don't know anything? I may not have been their target. Jonathan raised his eyebrows. He then turned to Norman. How much longer until the ointment is ready? Norman glanced at his watch. A couple of hours, maybe. They told me they'll have it as soon as possible. Jonathan fixed his eyes on Jeremy. His tone was calm, but threatening. You have 2 hours to decide how you want to die. Shivers ran down Jeremy's spine as he remembered the stories he had heard about Jonathan's ruthlessness. He knew he wasn't kidding around. Meanwhile, at the base's laboratory, the researchers had finished analyzing the composition of the poison that Jeremy had released. They concluded that it wasn't the kind that was instantly fatal. Otherwise, Jeremy could have accidentally inhaled it and died. Dr. Shananahan quickly ordered the team to concoct the antidote for it. They used a mix of organic plant reagents, metabolized carbon dioxide, and water, which was harmless to the human body. An hour later, they gave the antidote to Kyle and the others who had come into contact with the poisonous powder. Though they were weak and sore all over, they hadn't suffered any permanent injuries. Kyle got out of bed and shook Dr. Shanahan's hand. Thank you, Doctor. The latter smiled humbly. No problem. You're a lab employee. We wouldn't let anything happen to you. Something in his tone made Rebecca think that he knew they were more than just ordinary lab workers. Though she was still suspicious of him, she decided to give him the benefit of the doubt for the time being. She made a mental note to look into his background. Kyle took his phone out of his pocket and checked his messages. His expression quickly changed when he read one in particular. Rebecca was about to ask him what was wrong when he said, "An armed conflict just broke out near the border. Peru has declared war on Chile." How did this happen? I knew the two countries were at odds, but why would Peru do something so drastic when Chile has U.S.'s support? He gave her a meaningful look. She immediately understood that he didn't want to discuss the topic in front of so many people, so she made an excuse to be alone with him. Once everyone had left the room, Kyle grabbed her arm. "Do you remember the information we found out earlier? Peru has been eyeing Chile's research, and the country has the support of a few large consortiums. Maybe that's why they were confident enough to invade the border." Rebecca's expression changed when she suddenly realized that the war between the two countries had something to do with what had happened at the lab. It all made sense to her at that moment. She was more certain than ever that there were spies among them, and, she had just found out, one of them had sent a plane to kill her father. When Kyle saw the expression on Rebecca's face, he knew they were both thinking the same thing, but he wasn't aware that Jonathan had been attacked. "I know Peru has the support of all those consortiums, but declaring war on Chile is a big risk." Rebecca shook her head in disagreement. "You have no idea what they're capable of. While you were unconscious, they sent a plane to attack my father. Fortunately, he was prepared, so he sent his fighter jets to capture it. He and Norman have Jeremy, and they're interrogating him as we speak." Kyle was too stunned to speak. Both he and Rebecca were confused by everything that had happened. There seemed to be something hiding behind the curtain that they just couldn't see. Bruno played with his gun in his hand as he made a phone call. After he finished, he walked into a room and opened a drawer, where he found various guns, bullets, and some other weapons. He put a suitcase on the floor and he began to fill it with items from the drawer and the cabinets. He threw some clothes on top and then closed the suitcase. 2 hours later, he boarded a small plane headed to the border city in Peru. He looked around at the other passengers. Everyone was wearing the same uniform as him: a tight black jacket, a loose pair of black pants, and black military boots. He noticed that everyone's jacket had a gold python embroidered on the lapel. The only difference was that Bruno's jacket also had a symbol on the shoulder. They arrived a few hours later. Bruno disembarked, and he noticed that another aircraft had landed. A man in a military uniform went over to greet them. When he saw Bruno, he broke into a wide smile. "Hello, sir. You are the commander of the Golden Pythons Corps? Mr. K told me about you. I'm your liaison here. My name's Cobra." Bruno smiled back. "Actually, I'm just the deputy commander. You can call me Boyd." They had given him the undercover name after he had joined the mercenaries, and he preferred that to his real name. Because he felt he didn't belong anywhere and his family was an embarrassment, he wanted to leave his past behind. His mother was dead anyway, and he was sure everyone else had forgotten about him. Cobra slapped him on the back. "Very well, Boyd. I've heard good things about you. Let's get going. The war has started, and we'll need your help." Bruno nodded. "That's why we're here. As long as you pay us a hefty fee, we won't let you down." Cobra roared with laughter. "I like your sense of humor." They chatted as Cobra took him and the other troops to the base. The news of Peru's attack on Chile was all over the news by the next day. Layla woke up in her dorm room early in the morning and she checked her phone as usual. She was shocked to read that the two countries were at war. She scrolled through an article and discovered that a few large consortiums in Peru had hired tens of thousands of mercenaries to attack Chile's border. She wasn't interested in political conflicts, but she knew Oliver and Reggie were in Chile on a business trip. They were supposed to have returned the previous day, but she hadn't heard from them. She continued reading the article, which stated that the cause of the conflict was a biological agent that Chile had developed in a high-tech lab next to the Peruvian border. Peru claimed that the agent was toxic and harmful to the environment and humans. The article also mentioned that it had enormous value and could reap billions of dollars in revenue. Layla started panicking. She quickly called Oliver and waited impatiently for him to pick up. Oliver and Reggie were supposed to have taken a private plane back to Havana, but Oliver had received a call telling him that there was an emergency he had to deal with in the U.S. He had told Reggie to return to Havana on their private plane that evening while he flew to the U.S. However, the pilot had fallen ill and had been taken to the hospital a few hours before takeoff, so Reggie was forced to spend another night in Chile. Soon, after he fell asleep, he was awoken by the sound of gunfire. He looked out the window, but he couldn't see anything in the darkness. He then checked his phone, and he discovered that Peru had just invaded Chile not far from where he was. The two countries were officially at war. He panicked. His pilot was still in the hospital, and Chile had just banned all private planes from entering or leaving the country. He tried to call Rebecca, but he couldn't get through. He wondered whether the lines of communication had been cut off. Meanwhile, Oliver's plane had just landed in the U.S. As soon as he heard the news that war had broken out, he called his son. It took a while for the call to connect. When he heard Reggie's voice, he sighed with relief. "What's up? Did you manage to get out of Chile? I just heard the news." "Hey, Dad. No, I couldn't get out. The pilot got sick, and Chile has prohibited all private planes from leaving the country, so I can't take another one. I booked a commercial flight that leaves 3 days from now. There were no tickets available before then." "Just stay calm and don't go anywhere. I'm going to buy a plane ticket back to Chile." "Dad, it's okay. I have 4 bodyguards with me. Don't worry. I'm safe here. I'll just stay in the hotel and go to the hospital if I need to. I can take a private car to the airport before my flight." Oliver sighed with frustration. "But I am worried. You got shot in the shoulder, and you have to see a specialist. I don't trust the healthcare system in Chile. You should get home as soon as possible. Things could get worse there. This is just the beginning." No matter how much Reggie protested, Oliver insisted on returning to the country. The next morning, Reggie went to the hospital to have his gunshot wound checked, and he noticed that there were fewer doctors in the building than usual. He asked one of the nurses, who told him that they had all been sent to the border to assist in the war. He was shocked. After his examination, he returned to the hotel. That afternoon, he heard a plane flying overhead. 2 of his bodyguards had gone off to buy some emergency medical supplies in case the situation worsened. The other 2 stood outside Reggie's room. A few hours later, he heard a knock at the door. He looked out the peephole and saw one of his bodyguards standing there. So he opened the door. Suddenly, a stranger appeared out of nowhere and pointed a gun at his head. Back in Havana, Layla was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She had been calling Oliver and Reggie all morning, but neither of them were picking up. Her friends invited her to the cafeteria at lunchtime, so she went with them. She had been so anxious that she had skipped her classes that morning, but she knew she had to eat something. After lunch, she tried calling her father and brother again. She finally got through to Reggie's line, but she heard a stranger's voice. She introduced herself and asked to speak to her brother. The man laughed. "I'm afraid he's unavailable at the moment." Layla was shocked to hear a stranger's voice at the other end of the line, but she forced herself to remain calm. "May I ask who I'm speaking to? Where's my brother?" The man laughed again. "Never mind who I am. You have a precious brother. His life is in your hands now." Layla's heart started pounding, and her anxiety was apparent in her voice. "What do you want with him?" "You'll find out soon enough. We need you to cooperate for the time being. Listen carefully. Go to your university's main building. You'll see a black car parked out front. Get in, and don't ask any questions. If you don't do as we say, we'll kill your brother." Layla turned pale. "Why should I believe you? How do I know my brother didn't just lose his phone? Is this some sort of scam?" The man chuckled. "This is no scam, lady. Just do as you're told." And then he hung up. Moments later, her phone rang again. It was a video call, and she could see that Reggie had been bound and gagged. She wasn't sure where he was, but it appeared to be an old abandoned factory somewhere. He was sitting on the floor, tied to a stone pillar. Two men in black hoodies and masks were standing above him menacingly, one holding a knife to his throat and the other pointing a gun to his head. She gasped, and then she started screaming. "Let him go, you bastards! Leave my brother alone!" "We'll leave him alone if you get into that car like we told you. You have 10 minutes. Don't hang up. We want to make sure you follow orders." Layla fought back tears as she grabbed her coat and bag and ran out of the dorm. As she was rushing across campus to the main building, she bumped into Sean. She was so lost in thought that she barely noticed him, but he immediately realized that something was wrong. He yelled after her. "Layla, what happened? Why are you in such a hurry?" She continued running without looking back. He hesitated, wondering if he should go after her. Just then, the bell rang. When Layla reached the building, she saw the black car at the side of the curb, just like Reggie's captor had told her. The windows were tainted, however, so she couldn't see who was inside. She stopped at her tracks, wondering if she should get in. She was still connected to the video call and had her phone in her hand. She looked at the screen and saw that one of the thugs had grabbed Reggie by the hair and was holding the knife blade an inch from his neck. He sneered at her. "Get in, or I'll slit his throat." Reggie passed out at that moment. Layla watched in wide-eyed astonishment. She couldn't believe someone would try to harm Reggie. Tears ran down her cheeks. "Okay, I'll get in the car. Please don't hurt him. Just tell me where I'm going." "Stop asking questions and do as you're told if you want to see your brother alive. His life is in your hands now." Layla glanced around nervously. Classes hadn't ended yet, and the only car was parked at the entrance. There was no one else in sight. She didn't usually leave the university so early, and she also had fewer bodyguards hanging around her when attending classes than when she left campus. Only 2 bodyguards were protecting her, and she realized they must have been accosted because she didn't see them anywhere. 40 seconds left, the man on the phone said. Suddenly, she heard Sean behind her. "Layla, don't be afraid. I know what's happening, and I'm about to call the police." He pulled his phone out of his pocket and dialed the local police station. The person on the phone laughed. "What good is your police? We're in Chile." Sean went pale, but he still called the police. After a few rings, his call was connected to a dispatcher. Sean spoke fast. "I want to report," but his voice was cut off when suddenly, out of nowhere, someone hit him on the back of his head. He collapsed to the ground, and his nose began to bleed. Layla cried out in alarm and bent over to help him up. "Sean, don't worry about me. You have to go. Run!" She was terrified because the people had guns and were very dangerous. She had lived a sheltered life, having always been protected by bodyguards. Although she knew that Oliver had a lot of enemies, she had never encountered men openly wielding guns in public. The man cackled over the phone. "How sweet. Look at the lovebirds trying to protect each other." The man who knocked Sean over the head glanced down at him and sneered. The voice continued. "You have 12 seconds left. 10, 9, 8, 7. Layla felt her breathing quicken, and she glanced at the black car, then at Sean, and then at the black car again. She took a deep breath and ran toward the car. Sean wiped the blood on his face with his sleeve and hurried after her. The car's rear passenger door swung open, and someone reached out to grab Layla. 0. Time's up. As Layla disappeared into the car, Sean caught her hand to pull her back out, but the person inside was too strong and pulled Sean in as well. The door slammed shut, and the black car sped away. Its tires screeched on the road, and its engine roared as it disappeared into the distance. Thousands of miles away, in an abandoned desert oasis town located in a remote area of the Chilean desert, a man hung limply with his arms chained to the ceiling. He was the leader of the gang that had been caught earlier that day when Jonathan's men had shot the jet down. The man had been hanging on the ceiling all day and was on the brink of collapse. Someone entered the dark and musty room with a blowtorch and placed it underneath the man, just below his feet. The person clicked the igniter, and a blue flame burst out of the nozzle. Soon, the pungent smell of burning flesh filled the air. The man squirmed to move his feet away from the flame and wailed in agonizing pain. His voice was almost hoarse, and his eyes rolled back as he tried to stay conscious. The door creaked open again, and Jonathan entered the room, holding a small bottle and a brush. He handed the items to Norman. "Try this. It's from the biomanufacturing facility." Norman nodded and extinguished the blowtorch. He then dipped the brush into the bottle and painted over the blisters on the man's feet. The man screamed and struggled to break free. His body swung about as if he were on a swing. The pain was unbearable. A hot itching sensation ran up his legs and spread across his entire body. He howled and wished he would die. Jonathan smiled. "It's quite effective. Give him some more." Norman dipped the brush into the bottle once more and applied the liquid to the man's legs, arms, and torso. The sounds of muffled screaming came from the basement of the rundown house in the abandoned desert town. Sweat dripped off the man hanging from the ceiling, forming a pool beneath his feet. He grimaced and wheezed. "Okay, I'll talk." Norman glanced at him with indifference. "You've wasted a lot of our time." The man's face contorted as the itching sensation burned his skin. "Ask me anything. I'll tell you whatever you want to know. Please, make the itching stop." Jonathan shrugged. "That depends on your answers. Who sent you, and what for?" The man took a deep breath. "It was someone from Percor Industries in Peru. All I know is that he's called Mr. Ramos. I don't know if that's his real name." Jonathan narrowed his eyes. "Why did he send you?" "I'm not sure. Mr. Ramos only gave me one instruction. He told me to kill everyone in the SUV. He sends a lot of men out to execute a mission, but he only gives each of us one instruction. We all have different roles, and we don't work together." "So, your only job was to kill people?" "Yeah, I'm a sniper. Percor Industries hired me. I flew in with 4 other men. There were 2 pilots, another sniper, and a tracker." Jonathan stared into the man's eyes. "Do you know Chester?" The man nodded. "Yeah, I know him. He's my trainee. Mr. Ramos brought him to our base, and I taught him how to use weapons." "Who's Chester? Where did he come from?" "I don't know. We don't speak about things like that, because they're not important." Jonathan broke his gaze and walked around the hanging man before continuing. "Who is Mr. Ramos? How does he fit into Percor Industries?" The man winced. "I don't know. I've never seen his face. He always wears a cloak that covers his face." Jonathan growled. "Tell me more." The man breathed heavily. "I can't. All I know is that the heir to the business almost died, and he saved them. Because of that, he holds a high position in the organization. It's the only reason the head of the business agreed to the deal he proposed." Norman raised his eyebrows. "What deal?" The man kept quiet, so Norman dipped the brush into the bottle again. The man saw it and tried to swing away from Norman. "No, don't. I'll tell you." Norman stepped back and closed the lid of the bottle. The man sighed. "There's a spy in the biomanufacturing facility. Once the research is finalized and the formula is released, the spy will send it to Percor Industries. I don't know much else, only that there's a fat paycheck waiting for me once the job is done." His eyes had begun to water from the unbearable burning itch on his skin. "I don't know anything else. You have to believe me. Please, I can't take it anymore." Jonathan looked at the squirming man. His face darkened. "One more piece of information and then we're done. I want Mr. Ramos's contact details and address." Norman climbed onto a small table and cut the man's wrists free. The man fell to the ground and began to roll around, scratching his body against the hard floor. "Please, make the itching stop. I promise I'll give you his details. Please, hurry. It's burning." Jonathan nodded, and Norman poured a bucket of water over the man. The man gasped and groaned as the pain slowly began to ease. Jonathan handed him a piece of paper and a pen.
Write it down.
Callum was lying on an old bed in a room of a run-down house. A thin layer of gel covered his face. His skin began to wrinkle and pucker as it absorbed the gel. The effect was fast, and Rebecca noticed the change immediately. She carefully wiped his face with a soft cotton cloth as she peeled the thin skin mask off, revealing facial features familiar to her. Callum, it's really you. Although she already knew it was Callum, seeing his face made it all more real. Her heart beat against her chest with nerves and anticipation. Kyle took the mask from her and studied it. The gel hadn't damaged it, and Kyle looked at it curiously, thinking that the person who had made it must have been genuinely skilled. Rebecca gazed at her brother sadly. It's a pity we can't cure his current condition. She carefully examined him, taking his pulse and listening to his breathing. It was too difficult to cure him with alternative medicine techniques, and she didn't know if any clinical treatments would work either. Kyle looked at her and put his hand on her arm.
It's going to be okay, Becky. He's still Callum deep down inside. He's tough, and we still have some time. I'm sure you can ask Dr. Shananahan for help.
Rebecca nodded. Yeah, I suppose you're right. Dr. Shananahan knows all about biological reagents, as well as alternative medicine. I'll ask my father to speak to him. As they discussed Callum's situation, their phones beeped simultaneously. They quickly read the incoming message from Colonel Hunter.
We need to move ahead with the next step of the mission. We'll go to the border of Chile and Peru and establish a base to protect the biomanufacturing lab. Officer Davis, you've completed your mission to capture the spy, and your order is to escort him to our headquarters. We've established a safe passage for you. Details will be communicated in due course. Captain Gonzalez, your orders are to join the squad at the border. Rebecca reread the message, and her eyes widened. She had to return to America, but Kyle was to stay behind and fight on the front lines. She reached out and grabbed his arm. I'm not going back. Kyle frowned. Becky, we have to obey orders. It's our duty.
She shook her head. No, it's too dangerous. I'll stay here and help you. Kyle looked into her eyes.
Becky, it's precisely because it's so dangerous that you have to leave.
She glared at him with the stubbornness in her eyes that he had seen so many times before.
My sweet Becky, I've been in the army for long enough to know how to handle dangerous missions. I'll be okay.
She shook her head again and clutched his arm tightly. She said nothing, but stared at him with her large almond-shaped eyes. Her forehead creased with worry. Kyle felt a lump in his throat. He leaned over and pulled her into his arms. He held her in a tight embrace.
Are you sure about this? Are you really going to defy Colonel Hunter's orders and not return to the headquarters?
She smiled feebly. Yeah, I'm sure. I know about alternative medicine. I can hide away and help if you get hurt. I promise I won't be in the way or get myself into danger. He gazed into her eyes.
Think about it carefully first.
Kyle, I'm not going back. He sighed.
Are you sure?
She nodded again, and he hugged her even tighter. He ran his hand up her back until he reached the nape of her neck. He applied pressure, and in an instant, her body went weak, and she collapsed against his chest. Kyle lifted her into his arms and looked at her with helplessness in his eyes. He walked over to the door and was about to open it when Jonathan pushed it open from the other side. His mouth twisted when he saw Rebecca lying listlessly in Kyle's arms, and then he glared at Kyle. Jonathan clenched his jaw as he strode toward Kyle and snatched Rebecca from his arms.
What have you done to her?
Kyle felt his heart pound against his chest and wasted no time explaining.
Mr. Davis, it's not what you think.
He reached for his phone and showed Jonathan the message from Colonel Hunter.
I have to go to the border. Becky's been ordered to escort the spy back to our headquarters, but she doesn't want to go. I'm worried she'll be in danger if she stays, so
His voice trailed off as he realized something. He had emphasized that Rebecca didn't want to go back. He wondered if Jonathan understood that she was willing to put herself in danger to be with him. He knew it was useful trying to explain it. He knew Jonathan had a reputation for being ruthless, and he suddenly expected the worst. Jonathan didn't say anything and stared at Kyle briefly before turning around with Rebecca in his arms. He walked down the hallway to another room and gently lay her on an old bed. He then instructed one of his men to guard the door. Kyle stood in the doorway, feeling helpless. He looked down at his phone and reread the message from Colonel Hunter. Jonathan peered over Kyle's shoulder and caught a glimpse of Callum. His son's face had returned to normal, and Jonathan felt his anger rise. He pulled his phone out of his pocket and made a phone call. Jeremy had told him the day before that he had always remained in contact with Mr. Ramos and had fed him information from the lab. But because he didn't have any dealings with Percor Industries, no one had suspected him of cooperating with Mr. Ramos. His role had been to leak information about the reagents and research done by the biomanufacturing lab in return for a generous reward. He had said that he had been instructed to send someone a human skin mask with instructions on how to use it. He hadn't known who would use it and had been told not to find out either. Jeremy had also said that he never knew about Callum's relationship with Jonathan. It was only when Jonathan had asked for a genetic sampling test that he had connected the dots and decided to make a run for it. He added that he had worked with Dr. Shananahan for about 2 years, so Mr. Ramos trusted him. That was why Callum had been sent to the biomanufacturing facility as the perfect test subject. When Jonathan had questioned him about Mr. Ramos, Jeremy had said all he knew was that the man was an important figure in Pector Industries. The information extracted from Jeremy and the sniper correlated, and he immediately sent some of his men to the address the sniper had given him to investigate. After about a half an hour, Jonathan received a call from his men telling him that the house at the address was deserted. It was evidence that whoever had been there had left in a hurry. But they had discovered some interesting things in the house and had made a video for Jonathan. Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he watched the video. The room's layout instantly reminded him of something he had seen many years ago. It was when he had been in Cuba. Nancy had visited the Sloan family to learn about her relationship with Harold. They had been at Sloan's sprawling estate and had gone to Gavin's room. Jonathan had opened the door and peeked his head into the room, and what he had seen inside would forever remain engraved in his memory. The room on the video and the room in his memory were virtually identical. Jonathan felt his skin prickle as the realization dawned on him. Jonathan thought about Mr. Ramos, the mysterious man everyone had spoken about. His brows knitted together, and he picked up his phone. He typed a message to the phone number that the sniper had given him. "Gavin, long time no see." The response was almost immediate. "How nice to hear from you, Jonathan. Don't you think it's time we meet again?" Jonathan gritted his teeth. He couldn't wait to meet Gavin. The man had hurt and abused his son, and he wanted to skin him alive. Suddenly, everything that had happened fell into place. Gavin had used the car accident with Reggie and Callum as a ruse to stir up trouble between the Davis and Williams families. He had wanted the two families to start a war against each other, one that neither would survive. Gavin must have known that Jonathan and Oliver knew the truth surrounding Matthew Davidson's death. After Matthew had died, Jonathan sent his men in to deal with those responsible. Gavin had reason to hate both the Williams and Davidson families. Jonathan also realized that Gavin must have joined forces with Percor Industries to plot revenge against the two families. Kyle had finished replying to Colonel Hunter and approached Jonathan. "Mr. Davis, please get Becky out of here. She must return Jeremy to our headquarters, and I must leave immediately." Jonathan nodded. "Yeah, be careful out there." Kyle's lips curled into a slight smile. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. I will." Jonathan watched the young soldier walk away and couldn't help feeling sorry for him. The situation was complicated. He thought his daughter was too young to fall in love so quickly. He had watched Kyle mature into a reliable and decent young man. Their families were well matched, and he didn't see any reason to object to his daughter marrying Kyle one day. He pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. It was too early for Kyle and Rebecca to get into a serious relationship. She was too young, and he decided to wait another 2 years before telling her his true sentiments. Kyle would also have to complete his military duties and start his career in the Gonzalez family business. He called Norman to arrange a private plane to take them back to America. Rebecca woke up shortly after the plane had taken off. She opened her eyes and found herself in a small cubicle similar to those on long-haul first-class flights. She glanced around, and her heart sank as she understood what had happened. Lifting the blanket, she swung her legs to the side of the small bed and stood up. She walked to the window and peered outside. Soft white clouds shimmered in the bright sun. She ground her teeth and cursed Kyle before opening the door to the cubicle. She looked around and saw Jonathan, Norman, Callum, and Jeremy. Jonathan was reading a document and smiled as he looked up at her. "You're awake. How are you feeling?" She shook her head and yawned. "How long have we been flying?" He knew what she wanted to ask, but didn't say anything. "About an hour. It's a long flight. We should be in New York in about 9 hours. She nodded and sat in an empty seat next to Callum. "How's he doing?" Jonathan sighed. "We don't know yet. Jeremy has told us what Callum was injected with, and I've sent the details to a private lab to work on the antidote." He suddenly realized that Rebecca didn't know the truth. "We know who's been behind all of this." Rebecca raised her eyebrows. "Who?" Jonathan's eyes turned cold. "Gavin Sloan." Several hours later, the plane landed at a private airstrip in New York City. Rebecca and Jonathan took Callum home. Nancy had been kept in the loop about his rescue, so she was waiting. When the villa door opened, she saw her unconscious son being carried in. She couldn't stop her tears. "We need to get someone to treat him right away," Jonathan said. "I've already organized an expert to analyze the drugs he was given." He then asked someone to help him carry Callum to his room. The room had been unused for 6 months, but it had been cleaned for his arrival. Nothing about the layout of the room had changed. The trophy from the championship race that he had given to Wanda was displayed on a shelf. Because he had gone missing, Wanda had handed the trophy back to his parents. She had said that she would only take it back when Callum returned. Nancy had told Callum's childhood friends that he was coming back, so they were all at the villa to see him. Wanda pushed open the door to Callum's room and saw Tristan sitting by the bed. An equally tall and sturdy man was lying on the bed. She hadn't seen the brothers together since Callum had disappeared, which felt like it had been a lifetime ago. She quickly ran to the bedside with tears rolling down her face. "Callum!" She touched his hand and was relieved to find it was warm. She still didn't know exactly what had happened, but she hoped that Tristan did. "Is he all right? Will he wake up soon?" Tristan's usually implacable face looked troubled, but he answered as positively as he could. "Yes, he should, but he'll be very tired, so he needs to sleep for a while." Wanda nodded as her eyes roved between the two brothers. Tristan had always had fairer skin than Callum because Callum was more into outdoor activities. At that moment, the brothers were very much the same shade. In his cotton t-shirt, Callum's shoulders seemed much wider. He looked stronger. Because he was asleep, he looked calm, but there seemed to be a tension in his body that she couldn't understand. She wondered what sort of fire he had walked through to get where he was, because she didn't feel the same connection to him as she once had. While growing up, Tristan had seemed less warm than Callum, but he had stepped up to tutor her while Callum had been gone. During that time, she had discovered that it wasn't that he was deliberately aloof, but that he just didn't speak much. She was getting an icy feeling from Callum even while he was asleep, almost as if he were emitting coldness from his bones and warning people to stay away from him. Wanda felt uncomfortable and worried. She gave his arm a little shake, as if to pull the original Callum back. At that moment, the door opened, and Bo and Luke walked in. Luke didn't speak. He stood off to the side, but his eyes showed concern and relief. Bo, as usual, was much more straightforward. He walked to the bedside and looked Callum up and down before letting out a long sigh. "You scared me to death, bro." It was as Bo was leaning over him that Callum opened his eyes. Everyone spoke at the same time in their excitement. Callum!
Brother, you're back. Hi, Callum.
Welcome back! Things were blurry for Callum when he opened his eyes, and it took a moment before he could focus. When he did, he saw a sea of unfamiliar faces, and one he felt familiar, even though he wasn't sure why. He couldn't pull that person's identity from his memory and had no clue whether the room was full of enemies or friends. He sat up abruptly, instantly on alert. As Bo got closer, Callum's hand shot out like a bolt of lightning and grabbed his wrist. Bo was shocked, both at what had happened and the burst of pain that it had caused.
What are you doing? Were you faking being asleep?
Callum narrowed his eyes. They were devoid of any warmth.
Who are you?
What?
Can you stop the act? This isn't a melodrama on TV. Don't tell me that you've lost your memory. Have you forgotten us?
His expression changed as he realized something.
Your strength doesn't match the Callum I know. You've clearly been busy for the past 6 months. You talk too much.
Bo was taken aback.
That's harsh. We're like brothers, and that's how you speak to me?
Callum ignored him. He looked around and finally locked eyes on Tristan.
Who are you?
Tristan's expression didn't change. He had already heard about Callum's condition from Jonathan, and there was only sadness in his heart.
I'm your twin brother.
Callum frowned and glared at Tristan.
Those who lie to me deserve to die.
He would only believe his master's words. He couldn't be sure of the motives of the people in the room. Tristan had known that the likelihood that Callum wouldn't recognize him immediately was high, so he was able to move past his feelings of sadness.
Don't pick a fight with us. You don't have a weapon right now, and you're injured. You can't beat so many of us.
Callum weighed the pros and cons for a moment, and then curled his lips into a snarl.
What if I use her as a hostage?
He pushed Bo away and pulled Wanda toward him. Wanda suddenly felt that the world was spinning, and she fell into Callum's arms. His chest was pressed against her back. One strong arm was against her waist, and the other was pressing on her carotid artery. Wanda hadn't expected anything like that to happen, and she was scared out of her wits. Tears rolled down her face. What are you doing? Don't be like this. You're scaring me. Her last memory of him was when he had given her the trophy. At that time, he had been smiling, happy, and confident. They had hugged back then, and his arms had felt reassuringly strong. Those same arms were now instilling fear instead of security. Wanda's heart ached, and she was finding it difficult to breathe. Tristan took a gun from his pocket.
Enough.
Callum's eyes widened. It was the first time he had seen such a small pistol. He had made a point of observing the crowd in the room when he had woken up, and had decided that none of them had any weapons. He had felt that grabbing Wanda was a safe enough move. The gun had clearly been specially made. All his senses told him that it was real. Tristan stared him down.
Let her go.
Callum slowly moved his hand away from Wanda's neck.
Give her to me.
Callum released her waist and pushed her away. Tristan caught her and guided her behind him. Callum chose that moment to launch a sudden attack. He went straight for Tristan's wrist in an attempt to snatch the gun. He moved extremely quickly and with a ferocity that almost tore through the air. Tristan retreated just as quickly, and Bo and Luke pounced. They each grabbed one of Callum's arms tightly. It was at that point that the reality of what Callum's previous 6 months had been like hit home. While the rest of them had been living life as normal, they quickly realized that he must have been pushed to the limit to have reacted that way. Jonathan was alarmed when he heard the fracas, and he, Nancy, and Rebecca ran in to see what was going on. Rebecca tried to calm things down. Chester, what are you doing? Callum stopped struggling for a few seconds and looked at her piercingly.
You're not dead.
No, I'm not. And you'll regret trying to kill me sooner or later. She took the gun from Tristan and aimed it at Callum. We'll work together. Let's show him who's boss. A scuffle broke out, and Nancy wanted to stop them, but Jonathan stopped her.
Let them stretch their muscles a bit.
She was saddened to see them fighting and sighed, but she allowed Jonathan to keep her back. Although Callum was facing 3 opponents, he didn't seem to be at a huge disadvantage and was certainly holding his own. Chaos reigned until someone knocked into a display shelf. The trophy on the top wobbled precariously, and Wanda noticed that it was about to fall off. She ran over to catch it, but she slipped and fell. The trophy chose that moment to fall, and she saw that it was going to land right on top of her. She screamed and raised her hand instinctively to block her face before she closed her eyes. The expected pain never came, and with a pounding heart, she slowly opened her eyes. She saw Tristan with one hand on the ground and the other hand clutching the trophy. The base of the trophy was only a couple inches away from Wanda's arm. Her eyes were wide open with shock, and her heart was beating fast. She calmed down when she heard his soothing voice. "It's fine now." When she looked at him, she startled slightly because she realized something. A wave of fear followed. He gently put the trophy aside and then reached out to pull Wanda up from the ground. "It's late. I think you should leave. It's too dangerous here." He guided her to the door and closed it behind her. She looked back at the door and pursed her lips. She wasn't sure if she was feeling annoyed or grateful. It took about 20 minutes for the fight between Callum and the others to wind down. It ended with Callum being held in place by Beau and Tristan, while Rebecca used the same pressure point to knock him out that she had used successfully several times before. Callum, who had used up all of his energy anyway, was out for the count again. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Beau collapsed to the ground and sighed. "Well, that puts us under a bit of pressure. Should I find Norman to help us out next time?" Tristan and Luke were also very tired. Both of them were breathing heavily, but they busied themselves tidying up the things that had been tossed about. Tristan was concerned. "Callum's condition is complicated. He needs to be treated tomorrow." "What happened to him?" Luke asked. He rarely spoke, so his words made an impact. "Someone injected some kind of reagent into him, so he has 2 personalities now. The second personality doesn't know us. He only listens to the orders of the person who harmed him. His original personality is hidden deep in his subconscious. He needs help immediately." They all looked at each other seriously. Wanda hadn't left, and when she heard that the noise had stopped, she re-entered the room. Her eyes were slightly tear-stained. "Do you mean that he might have forgotten all about us for the time being?" Tristan nodded. "Yes." It suddenly made sense to her that Callum hadn't been worried when she had found herself in the path of the falling trophy. The idea made Wanda uncomfortable, though, because she didn't want to see the Callum she liked in any other way. In her memory, he was always sunny, confident, and full of the joys of life. And sometimes just a little bit wicked, which she had secretly enjoyed. She didn't know what to think about the new Callum. She looked at the person on the bed and wished she could turn back time. The room was silent until Nancy entered and went to his bedside. She gently wiped the sweat off his face. She was devastated, and her eyes were burning with unshed tears. She found it incredibly hard to know that the child she had raised so lovingly would look at her as a stranger. The next morning, Callum was sent to the treatment center, and Rebecca had to go back to the army. She took Jeremy with her. Colonel Hunter nodded with approval. "You've done well." Rebecca was pleased. "Colonel Hunter, I actually have one more request." He looked at her in askance. "I was in Chile, so I have a better understanding of the reagent that was leaked to Peru. I've also been studying medicine since I was young, so my knowledge base is better than Captain Gonzalez's. What I don't have enough of is combat experience. I can't fly in the air with Kyle, but I can do a lot of logistics and intelligent work on the ground." She noticed that Colonel Hunter was taking her seriously, so she finished strongly. "I want to volunteer to go to the Chilean border and help in the war." She was aware that there were 2 important men in her life who didn't want her to go back, but she figured that if she got the colonel's approval, it would all be fair and above board. By the time they knew, she would already be in Chile and wouldn't have a say in the matter. She smiled. "Miss Davis, you have to understand that it's a real war." Colonel Hunter's expression was serious. "So even the logistics or medical personnel will be in danger." Rebecca nodded. I know, but you also know that the war between the two countries is to gain economic benefit, and the reagent from the base is part of the scenario. I was there for a long time and am familiar with the situation, so I'm a very suitable candidate. Colonel Hunter didn't give her an answer immediately. He told her to go back and wait for notification and further arrangements. Everything went as Rebecca had expected. 4 hours later, she received her transfer orders. She returned to her dorm, packed, and prepared to go into the field with her fellow soldiers. She arrived at the base early the next day and was the first one there. She saw Jacqueline heading her way and knew straight away that she had just given some sort of performance because she was still made up. When Jacqueline saw Rebecca, she stopped for a chat. Long time no see. You miss me? Jacqueline smiled. Nah, who would? Rebecca smiled back. I did intend to come back for more ballet lessons, but I'm about to leave again. Where are you going? As soon as the words left her mouth, she realized that there were some things that shouldn't be asked. Pretend I didn't say that. Rebecca blinked, but had an answer ready. I'm going to give Kyle some punishment. Huh? Jacqueline didn't understand. He tricked me. He deserves something. I might practice my boxing skills. Rebecca was feeling less than happy with him at that moment. Jacqueline thought for a while. Remember to put on gloves. Otherwise, your hands might come off worse than him. Rebecca grinned at that. Don't go feeling sorry for him. Jacqueline rolled her eyes. I feel sorry for you. Ah, shucks. Are you flirting with me? Rebecca smiled and aimed a pretend roundhouse at Jacqueline's chin. It was at that moment that the colonel arrived with some of the others assigned to the mission. Rebecca immediately straightened up and made a proper military salute. Jacqueline did the same. Half an hour later, Rebecca boarded a plane and flew to Chile. The border between Chile and Peru had fallen into chaos. There was fire and smoke everywhere, and bullets rained down from the sky. There were civilians on the ground running around with guns to join the fight. The air was filled with the scent of blood, and those who were unarmed were living in fear. News of the successful outcome of the reagent had been broadcast, and it fanned the flames of war that was already frenzied. It was the first time that Layla had seen a real battle. The experience made her feel as though she had been ripped apart. Explosions and gunshots filled her ears, and the constant smell made her want to throw up. The car of people who had held her and Sean hostage had exploded less than a foot away from her. They had arrived in Chile a couple of days earlier. At that time, the situation hadn't been quite so tense. She and Sean had been blindfolded once they had been pulled into the car. Their kidnapper had told her that he would take her to Reggie and give her to Oliver as a gift. That morning, as they had been making their way to the car, they had met aerial troops. While the two sides had fought in the air, the people on the ground had become sitting ducks. As they crossed a bridge, it blasted apart, and their car had been right in the firing line.